Good morning and welcome to Sunday Coffee. Joining me is TK Eppley. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the habits of the mentally strong, probably get into a little bit about Robin Hood and the things that are going on with all of that craziness. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Ford, and this is EchelonOrchid.
Guess who's back?
Good morning, TK.
Good morning, fine sir.
How are you this morning?
Well, as always.
That is great. One of these days, I think, the world's going to calm down and we're not going to have anything to really talk about that's going on.
Yeah, because that's happened in human history before.
Yeah.
Did you bump your head on the way into your flight this morning?
That was called sarcasm. I really find it interesting. We were talking a little bit about this on the pre-show that the amount of people that are so up in arms with what Robin Hood has done, but yet they're perfectly fine with Apple, Google, and Amazon and how they treated Parler app. And while I find both of them absolutely wrong, I think that neither one of them should have done that. I find it still more detestable that tech companies like Amazon and Google and Apple have done so because they basically control the internet. And to me, the internet's a public utility at this point, and you shouldn't deny someone access to the internet, just like you shouldn't deny electricity, water, sewer. And then when I look at Robinhood, well, I still find what they did is equally detestable. They actually did it because they needed to mitigate their own risks. They were at risk because if things went really south, the SEC's coming after them, not the people that were investing. And they've got that little loophole clause. Maybe it's not really a loophole, but they got the little clause saying that they don't have to do any of the trades for any reason or no reason at all. Which as you had mentioned earlier, standard legal language. But I think that's a pretty powerful legal language.
Well, I mean, it's the moral equivalent to being able to refuse service to anybody for no reason at all.
Yeah.
Right. And I think when you look at some of the stuff that certainly leading up to the election, whether it was on Facebook or whether it was AWS, pulling people off their platform or denying access to their platform. To things like that, we have an inalienable right to free speech, right? And the number one rule of free speech is that you have to be willing to sit there and listen to somebody scream at the top of their lungs something you just vehemently disagree with and spend the rest of your life screaming against. And you have to be able to be an adult enough to do that. And we have really gotten into our feels, as the kids would say, and we've gotten emotional about everything. And that I think is a really big problem, right? And I don't know the exact platform, but I read one article where the people at Parler were considering using like the Russian equivalent to AWS, some Russian platform to host it. And it's like, think in the macro what you're actually saying there, right? Is you've pushed a platform that you may disagree with everything that they have to say, right? But what you're saying is you've now pushed it into a state that doesn't value free speech, right? But why are they doing it? Well, they're doing it just to poke the bear, right? Like so more or less, right? And that's I think in the bigger conundrum with Robin Hood. This is pitchforks and the angry mob, right? Run amok. And people just don't understand at that point how this works. Somebody invested in Robinhood to make them who they are today. And those persons or entities saw value in that investment as a growth instrument. And all of a sudden that toy or that growth instrument that they built now potentially threaten the other part of their business. Right. And we can argue, you can argue the morality, whether it makes you feel good or bad or anything like that. But I think we talked about this before. This is it's a bigger argument is when you talk to Warren Buffett says, invest in the stock market because it's never lost money over the long term. Right? There's been dips and there's been lulls and everything like that, but in a 30 or 40 year arc or longer, it's never lost in what I would call the employment arc. Right? It's never lost money. Now, when you get into your 50s and certainly early 60s, you have to be much more attuned and much more aware to, hey, is it still going up or is it going to drop down? Right? Because you're getting to that point. When you're in your 30s and 40s, you actually want to hope for a dip because in most cases, most people buy 401ks and other mutual funds, IRAs, and all the other things that typical employee investors put their money into. They're dollar cost averaging. And when they're dollar cost averaging, I want to have a significant dip in the middle of that so that I can get more shares for less money, for the same money, I should say. And that, when that starts to tilt on its head, then your 401k goes to a 201k, and you now have you're different. And talk about, and we were talking about just a small change in how that functions, what that can really do long term for your retirement. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, I can't remember which popular investor who had always advised that every year as a retiree you should take out 4% of your assets. And that's what you need to live off of for the year, whatever 4% is. But now he's saying it needs to be 4.75%. That's a big change. And that, of course, there could be many factors involved in that. But I think one of the factors, which is a danger, is because he is forecasting that inflation's going to go up and it's going to rise faster than what the stock market is going to rise. Right. Therefore, you need to take your money out. As well as there could be more taxes that are going to be levied on things, and therefore you need to take your money out.
Get back into where he went from 4% to 4.75%.
Oh yeah.
Most people are going to say that's not a big deal, but it is truly a big deal. And why?
Absolutely, because it's compounded, right? So if I'm taking out an additional almost 1% a year, then essentially I'm losing a year every 3 years of how long I could live off of that money. So if I planned at 4% and now I'm almost at 5%, well, if we do the math, that means if I thought I only needed 40 years worth of money, well, I'm really much less than 40.
Right.
So what am I now going to not do so I can live the same lifestyle that I was living at 4%? In terms of, that means the disposable income that a retiree might have paid to go on a vacation or to do whatever they wanted to do, they're not going to take because they're just going to pay the bills that they need to in order to live.
Right. And I think that's where I think when you look in, I'm pretty sure it was Buttigieg that said this shortly after the election when, the stock market is done very well in the past couple of years. And he was telling an audience that's not an indication of how well the economy is doing. Well, it's not in totality, right? But if the S&P tanks, retirees are screwed, right? Your 401k turns into a 201k, as I've said before, and you have to violently rethink what you're going to be able to do, right? And but I think that's then where I get with this is then we have this bigger discussion about. For me, it all starts with what are we as a society, as Americans, right? I'm not going to speak for the rest of the world. What are we as Americans wanting from our education system? What have we wanted, right? For the last, since World War II, right? We've wanted our education system to provide us with good workers who are happy with a white picket fence and a gold watch at 25 years in retirement. That was my dad's reality, right? He worked at General Electric from the day he got out of college till the day he retired. And he did well. right? But he did well also because he kept moving up in the company, right? He wasn't in, that old commercial, when I grow up, I want to be middle management, right? And so you get people on this gravy train of, man, my company matches my 401k and all these other things, right? And that doesn't, in my mind, create and foster an entrepreneurial spirit, and it also doesn't foster this spirit of tenacity, right? That, hey, look, I got a great job, right? And people often, and it's at the heart of the GS system, right? When the government workers, right, they're trading some top end salary or revenue on their own, like, going out and generating income on their own, and they're locking into a thing that it's unless you're malfeasant, is almost impossible to get let go from, and there's a guaranteed pot at the end of the rainbow. Right. But what are all those pots interconnected to?
Yeah.
Right? That's what we don't talk about.
Right. When you go back to Pete, he didn't lie, but he certainly didn't tell the whole truth.
Well, okay. So my dad called that lying by omission.
Right. And it's basically, it's very disingenuous. And the reason why it's disingenuous is this. The stock market is an indicator as to how the overall economy is doing. It's one indicator, because if the Dow and the S&P 500 and NASDAQ and all of that, if all of that is down, then people are not as likely to do certain things than they would if it was up.
Right.
People are going to hold. This is when the difference, when all of a sudden we get into that, bull market, well, people tend to, I need to wait, because we don't necessarily know how far down it's going to wind up being. And I mean, of course, I sit there and continue to go, like Pete's not a dumb guy. And so for anyone who thinks he's dumb, I think they're underestimating him.
I don't think he's dumb at all, but right. I think
there's an ulterior motive.
Well, I think that we have the general public is willfully uninformed.
Oh, well, yeah.
Right? And it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on. The general public is and will be, and people are like, well, they're just out there trying to make a buck. They don't have time. Yeah, if you look at your screen time on your phone and just cut that in half, most people will get about 3.5 hours of their life back a day. All right. And what are you doing with that? Right. And, frankly, what are we doing with the public education system?
I mean, haven't they already seen all of the cat videos at this point?
Seen all what?
All the cat videos.
Well, I mean, it's just
people are still making them. Is that why they're on their phone so long?
Well, no, it's that the dopamine hit, right? And that's the for most people, they get up, they start cycling through their phone immediately. It becomes that first dopamine hit of the day, right? And we've valued over the last certainly 20, 30 years now the people feeling good, right? And if you ask me, aside from stuff that we're probably not, I think I think that we've not placed a premium on math skills, right? And part of it, I think, is we've not placed a premium on things that require you to have logic, right, anymore. And one of my favorite memes that's coming up now, because April 15th is around the corner, is I'm glad I learned trigonometry, because trigonometry season's right around the corner, right? One of the things that we need to commit to, I think, as a nation, is to teach our children financial literacy, right? And what buying a stock means and what all these things, right? And the concept that when somebody's 18, how $50 a month can change your life, right? Because people look at, those are rich people. They're investing X amount of dollars, right? Well, $50 a month when you're 18 is over $1 million in retirement, right? And if you take that $50 a month and you get used to the conservatorship of investing, right, and paying yourself first, right? That's largely what you're doing. You're learning how to pay yourself first. Then when you can invest 100 or you can invest 150, and you've watched personally the magic of compound interest, then your art changes, right? And now when you're in your 30s and you're educated, whether it's life educated, when I say educated, I don't mean sitting in a classroom, right? Because everybody has the ability to be a life learner and grab knowledge however they see fit. That now you can make some decisions that may lead you to go, I'm not going to go work for the man anymore. I'm going to go make my own money. I'm going to go work for myself. Right. Or I want to go do this and I want to go do that. And you have some options. And that's really, when we talk about freedom as an adult, the way it starts is to have financial freedom. Right. And ask anybody who has made money in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, have it taken away from them and have to go get it back, and all of a sudden live without that freedom for a while and have to basically regress to something that they were doing when they were scrounging around in their 20s and 30s trying to get it together. Right?
I did it twice.
What's that?
I had to do it.
I mean, everybody, like that's the benefit that at the time you don't think it's a benefit, right? That's the benefit of being an adult.
Well, because life is not about happiness. If we get happiness, well, great.
Life isn't about happy. Life is about joy. Happiness is an if-then statement.
Right. Life is mainly struggle. And it should be a struggle, because then you get to appreciate those moments of joy. We want, you cannot become better without struggle.
Oh, no, and I think when you look at some of the folks on the left, that's the promise of a struggle-free utopia life, right? And that's people that are those salesmen right there. They're actually selling destitution.
I mean, I can't imagine going through life with, my partner, and we agree on everything, right? That is boring. That is, or one of us is dominating the other, and the other person is weak. I don't want that in my life. I don't want to be around.
No doubt.
Iron sharpens iron. There's a reason you have to struggle. A diamond isn't made without pressure.
Right. Dude, we got to get you. I got to get you right up to the factory that makes those little wall sayings that you put in your offices.
Which gets into a lot of it. I think a lot of when the real topic I wanted to get into today was what do mentally strong people do, and you've talked about this quite a bit, which is one of them is having gratitude. But I think it's not just gratitude. You have to replace self-pity with gratitude. And the faster you can get rid of being, self-pity and then just be gracious for the opportunities you have in order to grow, then the better off you're going to be.
I don't think it's self-pity. I think I've changed my stance on this over the years. It's self-loathing.
Yeah, okay.
Right? I think that, most people don't feel badly for themselves. Like, they don't pity themselves. They get angry. Right? You get angry where you're at, right? And I'll, when you talk about things that mentally strong people do, they have a plan, right? And they use the plan as a framework for success, understanding that they're going to have to go left and right and back and forward in order to achieve that plan. But the biggest single probably contributor to this is they have discipline, right? And this, at me if you want, but you walk around and 76% of the people in this country are obese, right? And that starts with no discipline, right? It's the little things that add up to the big things, right? When you have discipline, you get up when you don't want to. You do the things, right? And that's the difference between good and great, right? Is what am I willing to accept? What hardship am I willing to endure to get to what I call greatness, right? And great means different things to different people, right? Great means one thing to Elon Musk. It means a different thing to an 18, 20-year-old entrepreneur, right? Kid that's maybe he's doing something on the web or things like that. There's kids that are sending text messages out as part of ad campaigns that are making $12,000, $15,000 a month, and they're 16 years old. Right. And they're like, well, why do I have to go to school? right? That's, those are the arguments they didn't have with their parents, because they're like, Mom, I'm making more than you are. Dad, I'm making more than you are, right? And that paradigm, when you talk about all the bad uses of the internet, like all the bad things that happen on the internet, one of the things that the internet has done, and especially cloud computing, is it's democratized entrepreneurship, right? Because now I don't have to have a server room. I don't have to set up all these things. I don't have to rent space, right? I'm paying by the kilobyte and paying by the gigabyte, right?
Yeah.
So
what do you say to a child that is making that $10,000 to $12,000 a month?
What's that?
So what do you say to the child that's making the 10 to 12 grand a month and doesn't want to go to school anymore?
Well, hey, and I hate to say it, but you're doing that now. You might not do it forever, and this is a great start. But you're going to have to learn how to multitask. And one of the things when you're 15 is you're going to get out of high school, right? I think in the U.S. we've done this massive disservice to Americans, saying that we're too good to work with our hands, and the only way that we measure success so that you're not considered stupid is if you go get a college degree, right? And I think with some of the debt problems with student loans and some of the degrees people get, we've proven that that's not true.
Well, I think for the child, what we have to explain to them is that, look, this is true for today, but it's not sustainable at a certain time.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Is like what you're doing now at 15, and I applaud what you're doing. You're kicking ass and taking names, right? It's the 21st century paper route. Right?
Yeah.
When I was that age, I inherited from an older kid in the neighborhood. I inherited his 50 papers. Well, that point where my paper out busted up against somebody else's paper out, that kid was a year or two older than me. And he's like, I'm done. I don't want to do it. Rather than going to find somebody else, I just inherited his other 100 papers, and I went to 150, and then I went to 300. Well, then it became a 2 or 3 hour thing in the afternoon. It wasn't, at what point, I'm walking around at the time, for that period, I had a buttload of money in my pocket all the time. Right. And at what point did now, when I'm turning 15 or 16, and now I can go out and get a real job? Well, no, the entrepreneurial thing to do was to keep delivering papers for those 2 or 3 hours every day, because with tips and everything, I was making really good money. But it locked up a finite period of, that's where the thinking piece goes, right? And that's that discipline, right? Whether it's mowing yards or, whatever it was, that's a grind, right? When you're like, you get home from school, this is where discipline starts. When you get home from school, what do? Right? Time was go out in the yard, and back in the 70s, it was go out in the yard and play with your friends. Or did I go make sure that everybody had a newspaper on their front step before dinner time? Right. And I was beholden to that. I had to have discipline to do that. Right. And did it suck more than it didn't after a while? Absolutely. But what didn't suck? Having a pocket full of money as a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old. Right. And so you learn how to balance like my individual greatness there was starting with 50 papers and ending up with about 300. Right. And what are the kids doing today? Well, some of them are making internet businesses. Why? Because they can.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think what you hit on earlier, which is really important to talk about, which is, mentally strong people, they make a plan, and they know that plan isn't necessarily going to show immediate results. And this really kind of dovetails into what Jordan Peterson talks about, in that pursue things that are meaningful, not expedient. Because if you pursue things that are fast, then you're likely to not have it either be good or it should be done cheaply. And if it's done cheaply, well, then people aren't going to want to continue to buy whatever it is that you're selling because it's cheap. Right. So, we shouldn't be looking to expect immediate results from our plan. That confidence in that we know that our plan is being enabled. That's why we invest the $50 a month at 18, because we know in 60 years, that's going to be worth $1 million.
Right.
If you keep doing that, it's that confidence, and mentally strong people will not waver from their end goal. They will adapt over time to ensure that their end goal is still being met, or at least they should.
Well, they'll mentally, you get to a point where all of a sudden you're like, hey, I know I'm going to get my end goal, but right now, in order to make ends meet, in order to do things, that weren't accounted for when you made that plan because you couldn't foresee them, you might have to park that car on the side of the road, so to speak, and get out and go do something for a bit, and then come back and get the car and drive it some more down the road. that effective, periodic running out of gas, right? Okay, well, what do I have to do to get more gas, right? So you have discipline, and more importantly, you learn how to deal with anger, right? And I've said this on many occasions, if you're angry or fearful, you can't be great, right? And that learning how to manage fear, I think, is more important. Well, it's as important as having discipline, because most people get angry when they get stopped, especially when it's themselves that stop it, right? And fear is there to tell you something. It's not to be ignored, it's to be managed, right? And I'll give you an example. We've had folks that teaching skydiving, teaching military free fall, that you can see it. Like you'll go to the wind tunnel beforehand, guys will get in the wind tunnel so they learn how to fly, right? So we remove one big impediment that somebody's not going to tumble out of the sky, or that they can get stable, right? So you're starting to remove fear, right? You put them in a controlled environment and you say, look, you can be successful when you listen to us. And boom, they're flat and stable and they're not going to hurt themselves, right? Now, the big problem is getting them out of the back of the airplane too flat and stable. And if you think about it, air's coming underneath the airplane, so they come out and we call it going down the slide, right? As not to get too physics laden on people, but once you leave the airplane, you're bleeding off the energy of jumping out of the airplane at 130 miles an hour, and you slow down to go from a forward throw of 130 miles an hour to going straight to the dirt at 9.8 meters per second square, right? That transition is where people tumble and things like that. And that's where the fear mounts up, and you can see it. You can smell it in an airplane, right? That first time jumpers, you get up there, and it's kind of how it works is, as the instructor, you back up to the edge of the ramp, you step down the lip of the ramp, and you hold their chest strap, right? You lean out, you lean in, and then you go, right? The reason I say you hold your chest strap is because before, instructors have leaned in, leaned out, leaned in, and not held on. They've went, and the student freezes and stands there on the ramp. Now you've wasted a jump because the guy's not out in the sky, right? It's overcoming that initial fear, right? They understand it's something that's, and I tell people, skydiving is a great example for me, because people, there's first jumpers and there's dudes in the airplane that have 13,000 jumps. If you tell me at any given time that there's not butterflies, or you don't feel a little anxious when you jump out, you need to stop, because you've stopped recognizing that you can get hurt doing this. And you stop recognizing you have to have respect for the process. And I think the big thing with successful people is they respect the process. And when they feel those butterflies or that anxiousness, instead of retracting, they get excited. Right? They're like, this is the next step. This is where I can jump, kind of jump to the next arc of success. And it's how you manage that. Kind of, to use military language, we call it training tactics and procedures, or TTPs. It's how, and boys and girls, if you ever want to be hugely successful in business or life, you have to learn how to manage risk, right? And being properly trained how to do something, right? Or training yourself how to do something, right? And overcoming those obstacles of learning, right? And that's part of the growth process. And then once you have correct tactics, or the correct method to look at it, and then you have procedures, right? And one of the things we always say is like, hey, we want to be a product-driven company, right? For software, right? Well, why? Because it inputs process, right? It doesn't mean we're not going to deviate from the process if we find something better or more efficient, but it puts us on a glide slope of success, because now everybody understands where we're going and what we're doing, right? And I think most people, when you said, hey, why do you do what you do? Well, to get rich is not a reason. It's an outcome, right? And
you're not all afforded.
Well, so it comes back to, what is your why? Like, why am I doing this? Right? If you don't have a clearly defined purpose of what you're doing and why, the why making money in most cases in business is a byproduct of why you're doing something. right? Everybody knows we're here to make money, right? I'm not a 501c3, and we want to make profit, right? That's how businesses stay in business. That's how you as an entrepreneur, you as a thing, and it doesn't have to be money, but whatever it is, the outcome can't be happiness. It has to be joy, right? Joy is a never-ending thing, and that's the process. It's self-fulfilling. Like you move from joy to joy. Happiness is like, if I get this, then I'll be happy. That's a recipe for failure, right? And it's a recipe for people that appear successful, but behind the scenes are in great turmoil, right? And you see it. It's not like it. I always look at it. Like I said, I look at it through the prism of doing things that at one point were physically dangerous, and it had grave consequences because your body wants to fight that, right? And how do I do things that? How am I prepared, right? We always say you're never going to rise to the occasion. You're always going to sink to your level of preparation, right? So what's the lowest where are you at, right? So part of that success or the success train that you want to get on is, how am I training myself every day so that when things do go wrong, because if you're not accounting, right? If you're building a business and you're not saying, well, this could go wrong, that could go wrong, this could go wrong, and training to the best of your ability for that, when you actually get somewhere where it goes wrong, but it's not exactly what you thought, what's my base? How far back do I have to regress before I can start taking steps forward? And it's the people that are very well prepared, right? That are thoughtful about what they're doing, right? That are managing risk, that are more well prepared to absorb the bad and emerge being able to take many greater steps to the front. Right? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah. So, it's what you're really talking about is, calculated risk.
Right.
And putting
that's life, right? Everything in life is life. And the last thing I'll say is, you have to have respect. You have to have respect not only for others, but you have to have respect for yourself.
Absolutely true. And a good way to talk about the calculated risk is this. When I talk to people about what they're looking at doing, and so let's say we'll take the aspect of a potential lawsuit. If you have a 60% probability of winning $1 million in your lawsuit, effectively you're at $600,000. Okay, so you take the 60% times $1 million. So if someone comes in and they're willing to settle at anything more than 600,000, then you take it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the calculated risk. I'm willing to bet 600,000 if I have to go to court, to get an additional 400. But am I really willing to do that if they offer me more than 600? To me, no, because I felt I only had a 60% chance of getting it. So that's a way in taking a look at your calculated risk is what's the remainder.
But so what's the underlying emotional thing you're speaking to at that point?
Well, I'm actually not speaking to emotion, I'm speaking to logic, but
no, you're using logic right there.
Yeah.
Overcome a base emotion that most people ignore. Right? This is how you mitigate. This is classic. This is awesome. You've mitigated the risk. One of the risks of your emotions, and we'll talk about which one it is in a second, you've mitigated, and it's the emotion that F's people up more than anything else, so that you now create a basis for success. You're like, hey, I might 100% is taking 10 steps forward, right? I want to be able to have a positive outcome. And if I can take 5 steps forward, that's 5 more steps than I took before, and that's still a win. But it's not $1 million. Right? And there's always going to be a naysayer when you walk out. Oh, you lost because you only got $600,000. They're like, no, I made $600,000. It's like the old thing. It's like, hey, if something costs $1,000 and you pay $750 for it, you didn't save $250. You spent $750. Right? That's in the bigger picture. But what base emotion are we talking about that you're hedging against? Ego.
Yep.
Right? Lawyers can be in the ego business. Right, because that's how they advertise. They can, hey, we win, we come in, we punch people in the face, and you've seen Lola Hammer Stanley and everybody else on television, right? keeping your ego in check is the single greatest impediment to success, right? Because once you put, and I call them the earmuffs, once you put the ego earmuffs on, you don't hear logic, you don't hear sense, you don't hear anything. And then all of a sudden somebody punches you in the face or hits you in the back of the head really hard. And you're like, man, that was bad. Why didn't I see that? Well, I was too busy being enthralled with myself and how cool I am. Right. And, I think I've told the story before about you got two mirrors in life. One is how cool you are, and the other one is how cool you think you are. And the farther they are apart, and you got to look left and right, the quicker you're going to get hurt. Right. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially.
That's why I only look to the one on the right. Forget the left.
Of course you do, Dan. Dude, there's some days I forget why I love you, and now I'm just reminded. Right, I'm back. Now get a piece of paper. I got to write that down.
Yeah, I'm so against the left. I'm only going to look in the right one. Which gets me into one of the other points that I think that what mentally strong people do very, very well is they don't get distracted by things that don't matter
for very long.
Yeah. And I think this is a big reason why President Trump lost. He was so distracted by things that truly didn't matter, like replying to Twitter comments. I have no problem that he used Twitter. Like, put out your statement. Don't reply to others. Like, who cares? You're arguably, at least from an American's perspective, the most powerful person in the world.
Well, it's not even that. You're the president of the effing United States. You don't have to, it's like the old joke. It's like, hey, you can't stop at every barking dog or you'll never get down the road. Right. And I think that's the bigger question. Like, whether you agree with the guy or not, right? And this isn't a question about politics or anything like that. This is a question about behavior. Yeah. Right. And that more than anything else, and in the last 2 or 3 months, right, that it went sideways, right? I mean, it's a fascinating study in psychology to watch just how the tenor of it changed, right? And it's from day one, and really what that comes down to is there's a certain level of hubris and ego that, no, I'm right. Well, hey, Mr. President, there's got to be somebody in that room that said, Mr. President, you got to stop. Like, you got to slow down the Twitter. He's like, no,
I think there were two of them. It happened to be General Mattis and General Kelly, and that's why they departed as quickly as they did.
He's like, no, I got to double down on this.
Yeah.
Right. And that is, that low, that's, that ego, right? You got the earmuffs on. I'm going to listen to anybody. Right. I don't have to.
So do you think those conversations went like, so I imagine, because I've had plenty of people that work with me that don't agree with my decision. And so one of the things that I'd always say to them is, look, I understand that you don't agree, but this is what I want to do. So how are you going to help me be successful with what I want?
Right. But and this is, again, once you move past ego in this, hey, I'm, things that really successful people do, or happy people.
Right? I should, sorry to interrupt you, but the thing I should clarify is that first, I've heard their objections and I understand their objections, and we disagree.
Right. And that's okay. That is okay, right? We've gotten this kumbaya world where everybody's got to agree. Having disagreements is how you get to greatness, right? Because you might even have taken one little sliver of what they wanted, what their idea was, and said, "Ooh, I didn't think about that." It's, what are they exposed to? Like, what is their field of view and what is yours, right? And so how do we talk about that? But what you're extolling there is you're saying, hey, I've got emotional intelligence. I understand that I have the power positionally to say, nope, this is the way we're going to do it. I don't have to explain myself, get back out there and march, right? And they'll do that for a day, right? Or, look, I understand that we disagree on some of these things. Here's why, right? And you go through an explanation because here's your field of view, here's mine, however that discussion things. So now that you understand this is the goal that we're going to achieve, how are we going to achieve it? Right? And I understand some of your disagreements with it, but I want you to turn your disagreements into being the defender of my blind spot.
Yep.
Right? And I think that more than anything else, when you start talking in terms of that, you start dealing with emotions that people can function with. They're like, okay, he understands he's with me. He wants me to actually have his back or her back, right? Or she, that kind of thing. Because they're focused on going from A to B, and I think they have a blind spot for X, and I'm going to cover that. And you make them part of that process, right? This is a cautionary tale, because you and I both experienced this. It's great. You can have all the emotional experience in the world, or emotional quotient, EQ, IQ, because I've said this before. At some point in the game of life, you're playing at a level where everybody's smart enough to be the king, right? Who has the emotional intelligence to be the king, right? And when you get around people that are very smart but have zero EQ, they start getting rid of all the people with emotional intelligence. Yep. Because all they want is strict followers and bootlickers, right? Period. And there's no getting around that, right? And it leads to cratering, right? Because they might be successful in the short term, and they're going to walk off and look, I made me. But and I'll ask you, how many discussions did we ever have when we were working together where any of us that were in that group of people how many discussions where it was I? Right? Very few.
Yeah.
Right? Right? Because you walk in a room, there's 4 or 5 people. Right? What are we going to do? Right? Because we are all in this together. I might have to go answer for it to the board and to the CEO, but we are in this together. Right? We're going to, as a company, we are going to live or die by the decisions that are made in this room. Right? Then you get a CEO that's I. Well, then everybody else that has a propensity to be a weakling, they go with that. Because they're like, man, he's the boss and he's screaming I. He doesn't want any dissent, so I'm not going to dissent. Right? And that's how your trajectory is less. And being able to overcome that is, as I've found out, is difficult. And you can be in the room with that person alone and say, hey, look, I don't think this is your best effort. Right? And I'm doing this as a friend, not as a coworker now. Right? Because you're amazingly intellectually gifted and everything like that, but you're not, this is like, you're not putting everybody in a position to be psychologically safe, right? I'm not talking in terms of this nouveau psych thing. I'm talking people have to want to feel that they're in a place where their ideas are of value, right? And where their dissent is of value, and it'll be treated with respect. Right? I might say, no, we're not going to do it that way. But I'm like, all right, man, tell me. I want to hear. Right? And I've said this to you, and I've said it to others. Like, I want to hear all your ideas. I just want to hear the good ones. Right? And I don't have to agree with them. Right? That's not saying I want agreeance. It's saying I want you to be well thought out, because I want to hear your dissent. I want somebody to be squarely in my blind spot and come up and say, here's the truth bomb about what you're not looking at.
Well, right. I think the big reason that you do that, and many successful people do this, is because when we have an interaction with someone, we assume from the very beginning that they know something that I don't know.
Everybody knows something I don't know.
Right?
Like, if you want the guy that doesn't know everything, pick me for the team.
Right.
Right. The minute you lose that attitude is the minute you start losing.
Exactly.
You might win short-term thing, but you're going to go to the grave not having arced as far as you could.
Right, absolutely, because we just believe that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We go, oh, this person's an idiot. Well, then they do something. We're like, see, I told you, he's an idiot. That's why they did this. Everyone has something, and I think this is a big reason why I have such a problem with those that are on the extreme right and the extreme left, and that they only want to hear their echo chamber.
Right.
And there's plenty of people that I would say are liberal, and I don't consider them the far left, that have some really well thought out and good ideas. And I don't disagree with all of it.
Right.
I disagree with pieces of it. Same thing I would say on the conservative side. But those extremes, they're not tolerant
But that's who controls the narrative right now, right? I mean, as a nation, we used to, depending on who you elected as president, we would jump from either side of the fence, and everybody could still see the fence. What is if you look at kind of the narrative, they want to pull it from one extreme to the other every 4 years, and those kind of things, right? And it's all or nothing. Either in business, especially, it's very rarely,
it's going to be zero sum.
Right. But yeah, very rarely is it we all win or we all lose, right? Let me ask you this question. If you could retire with $50 million in the bank, right? But if you could behave yourself, you could have retired with 500 or more. Would you wake up every day of the week and look at yourself and go, I'm a failure?
Not at all.
No, you're not listening. You made it about the money, right? What I'm saying is $50 million is an ass ton of money. It's generationally changing money,
Yeah.
right? But what I'm saying is take the money out of it, right? And to a certain extent, that's how we measure success. When it's, you count, that's how you keep score, as they say, right? But I had the ability to do so much more, right? If I change the narrative and I say, hey, in my life, I helped 50 people, but I could have helped 500,000 if I could have gotten out of my own way. Would you consider yourself a failure?
Well, so I think we'll go back to the first part, because to me, if I'm retiring, it's because I've now chosen to spend my quality time with the people that I care about. That I'm done giving myself to the rest of the world, and I'm now going to be just giving myself to my my close friends and family.
Giving the gift of damnness.
Right. I no longer have the energy to give to the rest of the world. So I think that's why that's where I was going. Not really about the money. If I could retire today, which I'm not ready to, but that would mean that I've chosen that I can no longer give to the rest of the world.
Well, okay, but that right there is exactly what I wanted to get to. There's two types of people on earth. There's net givers and net takers, right? And the net takers are always looking how to get the shortcut to take from others, and you'll never get anything back from them. It's a one-way street, right? And when you look at some very highly intellectual people that are emotionally crippled, then it becomes about I, and it becomes just about the money, right? Or it's about, hey, I'll cut anybody out of my life if it looks like they're going to interfere with my money, right? And then when you talk about how successful you could have been, then you're like, no, you left a lot on the table, right? Because you didn't fulfill the prophecy of giving away your gift as much as you can, right? And that, I think, is more important to me than anything else. And so the sad part is when you get the acolytes that follow along and you create another generation of that behavior.
Right. And that's the aspect, because I've thought about this, quite a bit. I chose, due to getting divorced, and even during that time that I had to make a conscious choice that I was going to be doing everything I could to ensure my grandchildren had me in their lives on a more day-to-day basis. And as such, I made that sacrifice was so that way my kids could wind up having enough potential to have a successful career. And
Right.
At the time of my retirement, I could go do that, because I'm giving myself all over the place, knowing that I'm sacrificing, unfortunately, relationships with family in order to do this for the long term. Because I'd like to be, I would have loved to have been in my children's life daily. And I am in an extent, but not as much as I wanted, because someone had to go out and, make the donuts.
Yep.
And that was a choice I had to make. And so that's something that, is when is that going to happen? Hopefully my kids don't have any kids anytime soon, or we're going to have a different conversation. But But that's the conscious choice I made. Right now, I give to so many people, but at a certain point in time, the family's going to say, "Well, when is it our turn?"
But I'll use myself as an example. I have a 22-year-old and a 16-year-old, and the concept that with my 22-year-old, I was on active duty, and I was post 9/11. I was gone all the time. Right. In fact, one of the years I was gone 305 days. And so I averaged in that 270 to 300 days a year. And I think in 99, he was born in September of 98. I left in February and I came back at the end of November, type of thing. And so I missed a tremendous amount. Right. And we have a good relationship right now, but at times there was struggle. Right. And so with my 16-year-old, she was just turned 2 when I retired. And so I've been around a lot more. And it's not that I didn't, I think at some point you make, or I can't say you, but I don't think I've overcompensated, but I think I place an insanely great value on the amount of time that I get to spend being an active participant, right, with my youngest. Right. And whatever she wants to do, it's not we don't do what TK wants to do. Right. Because my job as a parent, my job as a leader is to facilitate greatness in others. Right. So what's your dream? Right. How can I help? Right. And, again, you might not like what I have to say every day of the week about helping, but my daughter's a basketball player. And I tell you, I don't coach basketball. I don't know anything about basketball. Right. I know a lot more than I did when she was 8 because I'm around it all the time, but it doesn't, just because you sit in the stands doesn't make you a basketball coach. Right. And, sorry, all you parents that want to yell and scream from the stands about your kids. You're not a basketball coach. You're a parent. Right. But I know what effort looks like. And I know how to help coach strength and conditioning. Right. And I know how to drive and get from A to B. Right. And do all those things. And then, be in the car when it didn't go well. Right. And try not to do anything but say, hey, do you have a good time? Right. And I think there's, even you don't have to retire to start to go, okay, I want to start giving back. It's what value thing. And do I miss certain things? Yeah. But you know what? This season especially has been, with COVID has been kind of an epiphany because every game has been streamed. The school got together and they got their stuff together and they got a big 4K eye in the sky that we get to watch the games on. So even if I'm out of town, I don't have to just hear about the success after the fact. I can hear about the individuals. Hey, Dad, remember this and things went on and this happened during the game, but I've gotten to see the game. Right. And it's, one of the benefits of being in deeper into the 21st century now is we can do things like that. But I think that, and I'm with you. I place great primacy on being able to do that. And somebody that wants to tell me that, if I'm going to go work for somebody or get in, that kind of thing where that's not important and I want you to focus on something other than that, I'm going to tell them thanks. And I'm going to go do something else that people call it work-life balance. I don't know if that's it, but, sometimes you get one chance to create a relationship a certain way and to craft it. And then if you don't, it's recovery for the rest of the time. Right. And when you have the opportunity, don't do that. Right. You only get you get one chance to make a first impression. And how do I do that? Right. And having 2 kids, I think I'd be better with kid 3 and 4. Right. I mean, it's just like anything else. You do things better, you do things longer and you get better at it. Right. And especially when it comes to parenting, there's no owner's manual. Right. It's like, every child's different. Right. And I think that, and then we go back to education, right? I mean, how hard do you push them down a certain path? Either you as a parent, I'll use basketball parents. There's parents in the stands that are yelling and screaming at the refs and yelling and screaming at their kids. And those are usually the kids. Those are usually the folks that got cut from the JV team when they were in high school, right? You look at the head coach of South Carolina men's basketball, Frank, I can't remember his last name. Dude's, look him up on YouTube. He has a great speech about parents. Right. And he's like, he sits in the stands watching his kids play basketball. And he says, frankly, I'm pretty sure I know more about basketball than most of the other parents in the stands. He's gone to a national championship game. He lost now, but he's he's been a basketball coach his whole adult life. And he's like, I don't say a word. And if the kids come up and ask me and start talking to me, they're like, go talk to your coach. Right? That's a valuable lesson in life about, hey, I'm here to be your parent. I'm not here to be your coach for this. It's also why coaches' kids get like college coaches love kids that were coaches of high school coaches, because they understand the pressure that they're under, because that game doesn't end when you walk off the court or walk off the field, right? I think as a leader in business, you need to understand that people need time to recover, right? And so we've gotten into this cycle where with emails and texting and everything else, we create this 24-hour work cycle, right? Where things are in there and you get an idea in your head and you immediately got to send it out. And so if you're the boss, people take that for action. And to a certain extent, depending on where you're at in the leadership train, you become a human starting gun, right? The minute you say something, somebody's got to react to it. Well, guess what, folks? You can put a delay on when that email gets sent, right? When you go send in 5 hours, right? Send whenever, send it in the middle of the night, right? It's a thought. Then people will start to understand, I don't need this now. And sometimes you have to be very explicit with that. And I think it's the same way with parenting, right? Is you have to be very explicit in the demands, right? Like, hey, here's why. And I tell people, it's like, hey, in most schools, especially in some of the private schools where they're trying to get an outcome, right? When we teach people how to shoot guns indoors, you can't give somebody the stress of having them shoot back or being shot back at, right? So you put all these artificial stressors on them outside and everything like that. And so when they go in, they have some sort of load on them, right? Well, that's what a lot of these private schools do. I always say, because nothing's important, everything's a big deal, right? My kids' school, the kids go to school, they're all well behaved, they get good grades, their parents are involved in what goes on day to day in the school, and there's no, like we don't know what's happening on a day to day. How much more stress do I need to add to the conversation? Right? And I'll tell you, this is something I did not do well with my son that I think I've done much better with my daughter. Right? Is putting that stress. And I always said, hey, get A's and B's. Right? I don't want 4.0 students, they top out early in life because they become box checkers. There's a guy, Chamath, I can't remember his last name. He's one of the original investors in Facebook. He's really thinking. He starts talking about, like, he's gotten to this point where he starts talking about kids that are Ivy League kids and went to Stanford and everything. He goes, what he's seen is they're box checkers their whole life, right? In order to get there, there's certain metrics they have. And so he's just checked them off their whole life. And then it really hit me. And it's like, don't make your kid a box checker, make him a thinker. Yep. Right? Hold my daughter, there was something that she thought was going on at school that was not correct. And she's like, what do I want to do? I said, well, first off, make sure everything you're saying is true. And once you are, go to the administration and hold the line. Right? I mean, that's part of growing up, is defending what you believe in. Right? And are you willing to do? What are you willing to do? Right? And that's, again, this is kind of to put a bow tie on what really successful people do. How far into traffic are you willing to walk to be successful? Like, when you know something is correct, when it's moral, it's a moral imperative, when you know it's correct, are you willing to do it? Or are you going to shut your mouth and stay on the side of the road and not risk getting hit? Right? What are you willing to do? Are you willing to do it if it costs you everything? Right? If the answer is no, I'm going to have trouble hanging out with you for a protracted period of time. Right? Because it will gnaw at me over time. Like, you had the opportunity, and it's usually about defending somebody else. Right? People go take care of themselves, right? People go in and take care of their money. Right? When business, right? That's number one, is people take care of their money in business. And then, they're going to work hard and everything like that, but they're all, hey, and I think some people think in pennies, not pounds, right? They'll go pick the pennies up short-term to get the pound, and forget about, hey, if I leave those on the ground right now, I can exponentially make more wealth, right? But everybody has to compromise in life, because that's also part of being successful, because I thought this was going to happen. It didn't, but this is success. But whatever code you live by, whatever morality you have, number one, is it in the mainstream of the world? And more importantly, at what point do you go, nope, I have to stop and I have to defend this? And if you're unwilling to defend it, then that's a bigger problem. Oh, look at that. That's awesome. Speaking of the next generation.
Yeah. So my daughter just woke up, and so she had to come
Awesome.
give me a hug, and it's like, then she's like, I thought you were going to show me how to make coffee this morning.
You're like, no, I'm showing you how to make a Manhattan this afternoon. Relax. Let's get our priorities straight. Daddy makes whiskey. Daddy doesn't make coffee.
No,
But that's like I said. I when young people, whether it's my child or others, want to stand up and defend something bigger than themselves, I don't care whether you got all A's. You're on the right track. Your life is going to be okay.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely will be. I mean, and that's the hard part is, standing up for what you believe in. I would, and I had this conversation with many other executives at companies that I work with, and they're like, well, the CEO, has this favorite person that happens to be working for me right now. I'm like, yeah, but that is just because they happen to be favorite. If they're a good CEO, and the person's not performing, it doesn't. They'll remove the likability of the person if they're not performing. Right? You can't be afraid of that. And I said, if a CEO told me how I needed to start running my department, then they don't need me. I'm going to go somewhere else. Everyone thinks because they use technology that they understand how it works. It's almost like the same. Like I feel like technology and marketing are so closely related now because everyone can see marketing and everyone can see technology and everyone thinks they're an expert at it. Right. And I would tell them, like, look, you know your discipline, and if the CEO doesn't agree with you, are you here for the paycheck or are you here for the mission? If you're here for the paycheck, well, then stick your head in the sand and be like, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I'll do this. And then they're going to want to know they're going to want to be involved in every decision that is made. And that to me, that is not fulfilling. And therefore I wouldn't work for someone because I'm not there. Yeah. I like my paycheck. I make decent money. Right. But I'm there because of what I do is fulfilling. And if it becomes not fulfilling, I'm no longer going to do it. It doesn't matter. And which is why, because I've had, certain people tell me, oh, well, I used to be a CIO. Okay. You're not now.
Right. Look out for you.
Yeah. And I go, look, just because you were, I mean, I'm not taking anything away from what they had done, but you've hired me to do a job, and therefore, I'm not here to ask for permission. Now, there's some things that I do need to ask for permission for. I only have authority to spend X amount of money. So when I need to go beyond that authority, then I have to get approval. Right. But I treat every type of approval, regardless of the dollar amount being spent by my teams, they all have to follow the same framework. Right. It doesn't matter if we're going to spend $1 million or $10,000. I want to know, what did you evaluate? What are the key measurements of success? Who are the players that are involved? What's the timeline? So on and so forth.
But that goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. The number one trait of successful people is they're disciplined.
Yep.
Right. And fiscal discipline in a company is king.
Yeah. Yeah. And when people say, well, I don't know that the CEO is going to agree with that, or whatever, I'm like, well, I just go back. Are you here for the purpose or are you here for the paycheck? If you're just here for the paycheck, then I lose a lot of respect for people that are just there for the pay when they're at a C level in an organization, right? I don't lose that respect for the people that are much lower level because, well, the opportunity for them is a little bit different, and so they likely, that's where the compassion and the empathy kind of come in. They unfortunately are probably there for the paycheck, and for at least for now. And hopefully, I'm hoping that I'll be able to reach them in such a way that their paycheck no longer becomes the most important thing while they're working at that company.
Right. I agree with that. And like I said, I think part of being a good leader is you also have to meet people where they live.
Yeah.
Right? And you have to, go, let me hop in your shoes for a bit and understand that, when somebody's 23, 25, 30, even 30 years old, they're trying to pay the bills, right? And they're trying to get some experience, and they want to shark their way up to the next level and get to the point where they have a voice, right? And I think the easiest way to do that, and you've seen me do this before, is go down and find the junior people and ask them their opinion, give them a voice, show them it's okay to speak up, show them it's okay to disagree. And you can walk in my office and be angry about something. I'm not, I might ask you not to talk to me that way in the future. But I'm not going to be mad about it. I'm going to be like, hey, you're passionate about what we're doing. I really dig that. You've got to learn a different, because you might have to learn a different way to say it to some other people, but I love your passion. Right. And I think that's, especially now when, I'll go in and I'll be working with CEOs and they're like, oh man, I just can't stand working with millennials. And I'm like, I don't think you mean millennials, because the oldest millennial is 40 and they're probably a director or a junior VP in your company. What you're talking about is those 22 to 30 year olds. And I said, that's not their fault. It's your fault.
I have yet to find a millennial that acts the way the media has reported them to do.
Me too. But here's the thing. You know what we don't expect? We don't expect them to behave the way that we behaved when we were junior people, because we understand that we're not in the same world that we were in when we were junior people.
Yeah.
Right? And you're saying, hey, what's important to you? Right. And I don't mean individually, as a group of people, what's important, what holds your attention, what makes you feel you're contributing to the mission of what we're doing and the outcome in a positive fashion. And what are you doing to help with your personal greatness? Right. And at the minute you do that, people stop worrying about a lot of things. Why? Because they're in an emotionally and psychologically safe place that they feel they can grow. Right. When you look at this authoritarian way of, hey, I'm the boss, do it because I told you. That's when, a lot of folks, like when we were young people, that, that's just because that's how they grew up in the 50s and 60s doing it, that, the old Mad Men thing, when one of the people walks into the office and says, you never tell me thank you. And he goes, I pay you every week. That's thank you. Right. That's, we've moved on. Like there's a different way to talk about that. Right. Because the minimum expectation is you show up and you provide value and we pay you. That's the contract. Right. That's the emotional contract we have. That doesn't mean you're fulfilled.
No, it doesn't.
And like I said, I one of the things that I love about you the most is when one of your folks left, you were mad. You were really mad. You weren't mad that they were leaving. You were mad they didn't come to you first so you could help them get a better position. Right? That's an adult in the room. Right? If you don't have emotional intelligence, you're going to be like, good, be gone. I never want to see you again. Right? But no, you were like, wait a second. That person's on an arc and they're basically, they're not doing anything to increase that. They actually might be going down a little bit and financially putting themselves in a position they're not thinking about, and all the other factors that adults think about. Right? Once you remove emotion, right? Your anger wasn't anger at the individual. It was anger at the situation they were putting themselves in and that you could have mitigated it for them. Right? That's adult response.
And that, and in a way, disappointment in that I did not give them whatever it is that they needed for them to believe my words of, when you're ready to leave, then come to me. I'm not upset that you feel like you need more, because at a certain point you are. I'm not going to be able to give it to you, but let me open the network up to make sure you're getting the right next opportunity.
Right. Because I might want you at the next stop when you've learned everything there, and I can bring you back 2 levels higher wherever I'm at the time. Right.
And not making that lateral move, or in some cases, someone that you can take a position that's down, but wind up getting a higher increase in compensation, because even though your responsibility might be less.
Right.
And those are the things that I frown upon. But I kind of go, why didn't you believe me when I said, when you're ready to leave, let's have that conversation. I'm not going to hold it against you. Like, I would be a hypocrite if I were to say,
yeah,
hey, you've been here 3 years. Well, sorry, you can't leave. I haven't been anywhere longer than 3 years, 3 months.
right.
So,
but I think some of the stuff we've talked about before, right? Even when it's not about people leaving, right? As a leader, when you uncover adverse things, harassment, those types of workplace things that are adverse, and it was allowed to exist because somebody that's between the person that's being harassed or being wronged and you was doing that, and that the junior people were afraid to come to you because past performance of the company before you got there, whatever, deemed that, oh, it's just going to be swept under the carpet, and then I'm going to be in a bad compromised position, right? I think that response that you had when that happened at one of the places you were working, where it's like, hey, tell me how I failed you, where you absolutely didn't believe me, right? What did I do wrong, right? Giving, as a leader, having that emotional availability is an intellectual availability to go, hey, look, obviously this didn't work out like I intended, because I've said time and time again, this is what I need for our team to be successful. And part of it is that transparency. And it's not just at times when we're talking about an after action of, hey, we did this, everybody get in the room, let's talk about success and failure. And I want you to tell me where I did wrong. And that's a very hard thing for subordinates to do to leaders, and sometimes leaders to accept.
yeah.
Right? Is that concept of, because I say it like this, as a leader, when one of your folks walks up to you and say, hey, why did you do that? Right? A lot of leaders, their first thing is like, well, what do you mean, why did I do it? And they get defensive, right? Well, what do you think? What do I think? I think, well, okay, this is the junior person that wants to learn, right? They might not understand why we made the decision because they didn't have the field of view to understand all that, right? Get your ego out of it and stop defending yourself and explain yourself. Right?
Because my first initial thought is, why did I do what? Because I do so many things, I'm not sure which one you might be.
They say no, like what? But if they'll go, why did I do? And then whatever that is, right? Why did you make this decision? Why did we do this? Why I get the outcome, but I don't understand. I want to know how you were able to go, because a lot of times what junior people don't see is we're here and we go to here. They don't understand the middle part. They don't understand what led to you being able to make that decision to make in their mind a leap that they couldn't see, right? And they want to learn, right? Or if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I don't think that's your best effort, however that comes out of their mouth, right? Good or bad, how do you absorb that, right? And do you absorb it by, hey, I really appreciate you coming to me. Let's go in my office and sit down. I want to hear what you have to say, right? And you have to be emotionally queued up to lean into it, not sit at your desk like this while they're talking to you, waiting for them to shut up so you can tell them where they're wrong. So
you mean the right response is not say, let's go to the bathroom where there's no cameras?
Yeah, that's
I did actually have a previous boss say that to someone, like basically saying, if you need to have a disagreement with someone, do it in the bathroom, because there's typically no witnesses and no cameras. And I'm like, I think like you might have actually done that before. Like it was a little bit.
You didn't just pick that one out of a hat, right?
Like, I get the aspect of, don't say something you could regret in an email or a text message, because it never goes away. But, a phone call, you can always disavow. But to go to the extreme of there's no cameras and typically no witnesses inside the bathroom is a little bit extreme for me.
I remember years ago in a setting, it was all dudes. We're having this discussion. Somebody was joking around. Some guy was pissed off at his wife, and another one's like, you can't live with him and you can't kill him. And one of the other dudes said, well, actually you can, and you can get away. He had this really detailed plan, like hyper detailed. almost down to the amount of gallons of gas it was going to take to drive, to over, right? And at some point, you're like, everybody stops laughing and you start focusing and go, wait a second. And I finally said to him, I go, look, because I lived on one cul-de-sac, he lived on the other, and our backyards overlooked each other. And I'm like, hey, dude, if I ever see your boat moving around in the middle of the night, I'm going to know what's going on. I'm going to have to call the authorities, right? And but you get to some people where you're just like, okay, you put a little bit too much thought into how that's going to happen.
Yeah, like it's just not. This is no longer sounding hypothetical.
Right. There's some preparation. There's some preparation that's gone into this, because there's some very specific things that you've advocated needing that don't just grow on trees.
I'm trying to understand why you bought the second wood chipper.
Yeah. When it starts with, you want to freeze the body because it won't go through the wood. It'll go through the wood chipper easier. You're like, okay, Spartacus, let's back up a little bit.
I think we need to stop the conversation because I now might be considered an accessory.
Exactly. How do you spell accomplice?
Yeah, I don't think I want to know anymore. Well, my friend, I am going to go spend some time with my daughter.
Take care of the next generation.
Yeah, she is, and it actually has started to snow here. So
it stopped snowing here, so it's coming your way.
Yep, definitely coming our way. So have a great week.
You as well.
And we'll talk again soon.
Sir.
Don't forget to subscribe. Still waiting for some topics that you'd like us to chat about. Always happy to do so. And take care and see y'all next time.